And the next topic is maximizing client lifetime value with advanced SEO strategies. And I'm happy to present our next speaker, Annika Haataja, SEO Director at Seeker Digital. Annika, welcome. We're glad to have you here today.
Here we go. Apologies for the delay, guys. Now we are ready to go. So yeah, like I said, talking about maximizing customer lifetime value, I'm very much focused on SEO strategies specifically. I've already introduced myself, but just very quickly, as I mentioned, working for Seeker Digital, we probably are part of the group of agencies where, especially after COVID and generally the economic issues that different countries have been having, most of us have probably experienced some interesting situations where perhaps client budgets have been reduced, demands are getting higher, contracts are shortening. So I'm very eager to talk about just generally client lifetime value and how we can boost it, and what strategies are the most efficient ones to execute. So we'll start by just going to basics with customer lifetime value, how we can measure it. Also looking at when measuring CLV is important. We're going to move on to a couple of core approaches that SEO agencies and teams can take to maximize customer lifetime value, from advanced strategies and some high value SEO projects as well. And then we'll finish off with a couple of nice surprise and delight tactics that you can add as an extra value for your customers. So there's a lot to cover. Let's kick it off with what is CLV? What is customer lifetime value? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about customer lifetime value before. The most simple definition is how much revenue a customer will be bringing you during your partnership with them. There's an actual formula for it as well, which you can calculate by average monthly revenue by client times the average client lifespan in months. Now, when we're measuring CLV, the most common metric we'll be looking at on an agency level is the total revenue that the client is bringing to your agency. So you really want to continuously monitor this metric. You probably want to review both your past and current clients just to see some different trends. Perhaps you want to rate your clients based on this metric. So who's at the top, who's at the bottom, what are the main differences between these clients? It might be the business size, it might be specific industry. So really understanding who are at the sort of top level. You can take learnings to your future sales strategies as well as your renewal strategies as well. Other core metric, of course, is client lifespan in general. So you really want to understand what's the average lifespan for a client in your agency. So again, reviewing who are the longest serving clients at your company, perhaps the types of clients that seem to churn quite quickly, and taking some learnings from those, understanding the trends. And sometimes you might find really interesting opportunities, especially if you review the clients that tend to stay a very long time, but they might have quite a low budget, and therefore their total CLV is perhaps lower than average, even though you might be working together for years and years. They are often the biggest opportunity for you to find some CLV boosting tactics as well. And then another quite core metric that you definitely want to measure is the client acquisition cost. So understanding what are the total costs when it comes to marketing and sales per client is really good to understand some averages here. For example, how long does your proposal period take, creating the proposals? How long is the whole pitch process, cost of software, etc. So effectively, you want to measure how much does it cost to convert a client versus what they bring to your business. And often it might be something that we learn in hindsight, but the more often we monitor these metrics and measure them, we might be able to draw some conclusions of similarities, especially when it comes to the client businesses, so that you can forecast a little bit in terms of what size contracts would you need to sell to that specific client to actually make it worth the client lifetime value. So these are the core metrics, but you might want to look at additional metrics as well in a slightly more granular level. So for example, total contract values. So it might be interesting, especially from like comparison point of view, again, reviewing what are the highest value contracts that you have, what are the specific elements that make them like good value. Perhaps you get sign off on contracts that have better terms. Maybe the scope was more detailed. So you really want to understand how can you elevate your sort of lower value contracts to that same level. Also, client concentration is quite important. So you want to understand what's the percentage of the total revenue that you get from one client or one client contributes to your business. So you want to understand what risks there would be if a high level client would, for example, terminate their contract. There's some benchmarks in different industries. Obviously, every agency is very different. Some benchmarks say that one client shouldn't contribute more than 10 or 15% of your revenue. You might want to look at your top 3 or top 5 clients. Do they go over 50% or 60%? So it's very much sort of monitoring and managing the risk. One good benchmark could also be the contract type. So how many retainers do you have versus project work as well? And then the final metric that we'd like to measure on a sort of more granular level is the average fee income per client. This is more around perhaps the sort of monthly resource allocation. So although you might have a long-term client that the total value is high, perhaps they've gradually reduced their budget over the years or the months. And now when you compare it to your other clients, they might be on a sort of lower scale, especially when it comes to your average monthly fee income from them. So it's really important to know, especially from resource allocation point of view, is there any value of over delivering? Perhaps for certain clients there isn't. So it might help your team to understand where the priorities really lie on a monthly basis. Now, we now know kind of all the metrics that are important for lifetime value. When do we normally measure these, or when is it important? Obviously, the first situation is probably that comes to everybody's mind is renewals. When there's a customer renewal, you really want to keep that client, if not even just renew, but upsell, perhaps cross-sell. We're also looking at metrics that are important for new business. So obviously, when we're converting a new client, we're hoping that they would stay for a long time. And there are some specific strategies that we're going to be talking about today, which can perhaps help with that. And generally, obviously, looking at reviewing your department profitability, the sectors that you target, and of course, also, are there any specific clients that unbalance your current revenue? So the benefits really, when we're looking at customer lifetime values, smarter client acquisition is probably the most important one. So on paper, you might have a specific ICP that you know is your target audience. But when you start looking at these metrics and actually measuring the value that you get from your current ideal customer profile, perhaps you need to change that, or it's more about validating who you really should be targeting. You also want to obviously allocate resources correctly. Not all clients should get the same level of service. So again, understanding what is the value that you're gaining. And of course, the retention strategies as well. It's good to learn from the higher CLV clients to try to reduce churn across the board as well. Now we're going more to the practical part. So there's a specific process that you can follow when you are trying to boost CLV. Initially, you want to define the specific metrics and, of course, understand what the goals are when it comes to renewals and new business. So you don't want to necessarily blindly to sell strategies that don't improve your overall profitability and therefore perhaps accidentally increase the cost of acquisition. So definitely understanding what good looks like is the first start. Then you want to start analyzing your current client portfolio and the ICP, like we mentioned earlier. So for example, if your client could deliver something that you're going to propose, if they could do it in-house cheaper and quicker, then that's not going to be the right solution for them. So you want to be able to tailor your solutions to the right clients. And once the initial prep work is done, you can start exploring new strategies you can propose through the advanced SEO strategies that we'll talk about today. But you can also move on to step 4, which is to fill in any sort of more like gaps in the revenue in addition to, or perhaps aside of the strategies, depending on what seems to be more suitable for that time. So if we start by defining the metrics, so essentially you want to benchmark your CLV. So you want to determine what good looks like. And the first point of call is often we can look at historical data, understand what good looks like in terms of lifetime value, total revenue from a client, and that will change in time as we're going through situations like COVID and economic shifts. The numbers won't look the same, so you really want to sort of balance it out correctly. And it's effectively looking at the different metrics that we went through earlier and put it into practice, and establishing benchmarks also perhaps on an industry level. So understanding if you're targeting, say, the SaaS industry, what is a good CLV for the SaaS industry within your agency? You can also look at sort of if you know perhaps other agency owners or people working in other agencies, trying to benchmark your sort of average revenue per client, and perhaps the life cycle as well to other agencies. There's also some benchmarking reports that are available to review. And yeah, effectively you want to understand on a client level, perhaps industry level, and then overall agency level, what KPIs you should be setting. So once you know what you're measuring and what good looks like, you want to understand your current client situation. And when we're talking about skills gap, we effectively want to find something that you can add value to the client. So you can go beyond just SEO skills. You might not even have an SEO in your client team. So think about the teams that might be involved in your work from the client side. And understand how you can either work together or how you can support them better. So not only looking at the sort of skills gap, but also, perhaps knowledge sharing and cooperating as well. So that's when you can actually bring true value for the client. So once you've established what the client really needs and what good looks like for your agency, then you can start identifying the new strategies for you to propose. So the idea with the advanced strategies specifically is that you want to sell something new and something long-term, and perhaps something outside of your core SEO solution. So when we're talking about boosting CLV, the first thing that often comes to mind is, well, we'll just increase our rates and make it more expensive. But you can definitely do that, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Even if your profitability might be going down because of higher costs, maybe higher operational costs, the automatic answer might not always be to increase rates. It doesn't happen overnight, and it can be difficult to justify for the client. It can also be quite hard to increase the CLV by just increasing the scale of the work, so doing more of what you're already doing. Again, you can try to do that, but perhaps, especially if it's a long-term client, when clients get comfortable, it's really hard to justify, oh, let's do more of this, unless if you have really great forecasts or ROI reports that you can share. Often they're just happy to keep it as it is. And also finally, for especially higher value clients, if we're talking about those like top 3, top 5 clients, if we leave them to sort of roll over in a month, that could be really risky. So the benefits of looking at advanced strategies as a selling point, either on top of your existing retainer or as a perhaps new separate retainer, you can really sell something a bit more advanced. That means you stand out from the competition. You're there to build a long-term solution for your client, and you can much easier, therefore, justify some premium pricing and higher prices. And this is work that doesn't really have to end, so it can last for months or even years, something that is future-proof as well. Obviously, the downside is that often for the long-term advanced work, procurement can take a long time, and it can be difficult to justify for the client, especially if the stakeholders don't really understand it, because SEO as a basic service can be difficult to understand. So client education is really important here. So being able to provide some additional resources, extra time, extra collaboration can really help to actually get them to convert. I've listed a few example strategies to kind of give you a bit of an idea of what we're talking about here. So first example is more sort of content focused. So your client might be in a situation where they are expanding to a new product line or perhaps a new service, and they want to be ranking very well for that. So effectively, what you can be proposing here is to build their topical authority. And when you're doing that from scratch, most likely, that takes time. It's a lot of effort. It's a large scale production. And this is something that includes multiple steps, one being obviously research and then strategy and then production. So it's a really good example of a long-term strategy. Another would be, especially very recently, has been a big topic around algorithm recoveries. So if your client has been hit by any of the recent updates, for example, HDU or the March update, hopefully not while working with you though, a recovery program would be quite a good idea, because again, even just identifying the reason for the manual action or the drop in visibility it can be quite a big task. And after that, you need to build a strategy and again, execution before the next update. And hopefully by that time, you would have built a great relationship and they would have been already impressed. The visibility increases and you might be able to sell another retainer. Digital PR hero campaigns can be great strategy to sell, especially because they can span for months. We've actually had some clients that we have campaigns that run for like now 2 years. So if you find a topic that, especially if it's something that can be updated every year, maybe some stats, and you can redo it forever, and you can find different angles, you can increase the scope, perhaps target different markets. So it's a really good example of, again, there's so many steps that you need to take, and by just the research, production, creation, asset creation, that already spans for a long time, and then the actual outreach and new angles can actually increase the value and the sort of retainer length as well. And then finally, the other example around sort of more brand SEO, reputation management. Again, the brand never stops, moving forward. You can always help your client build their brand profile, whether it's through, digital PR, perhaps reviews management, etc. So that can be something that is very much ongoing work and very topical, and something that doesn't really go out of style. Now, when we're talking about selling advanced strategies, the assumption is that technically there isn't anything operationally preventing you from selling the advanced strategy. So you have great client relationships, your project management works well, your sales process works smoothly. So if you have any issues around those areas, and perhaps some areas that your team wants to develop in, you might want to make sure you fix those first before you create more stress for yourself and the team by moving on to new services. Now, I also promised to talk about more sort of project work, especially now when, like I said earlier, client budgets can be perhaps scrutinized a bit more. It feels risky for clients to sign on for years and years and years. So therefore, one good example of work to be sold would be sort of more high value SEO projects. So the idea of these are that although when we're talking about lifetime value, often we talk about length of a contract. But the good thing about this sort of more high value project is that you can price them quite high in the short term. So although we could talk about perhaps even 3-month SEO work, it can be in total higher value than a low budget 6-month retainer, for example. And the great thing about projects is that you can do many at the same time, or you can add them on top of your existing client retainer, which automatically boosts CLV very nicely. You can also create very good processes, which means that you can do these projects all over again, which then makes it quicker and easier and cheaper for you to set up. And often when we're talking about projects, the expectations are perhaps more delivery focused rather than results focused. Especially if we have great clients who are educated well in SEO, they would know that in 3 months you won't get many results, especially if we're starting from scratch. So it gives you a bit of time to build that relationship, impress them with great work, and then in the end you can try to upsell again. So the real benefits of the sort of high value project is that often sign off will be slightly quicker because there's no risk element when it comes to length of the contract, and you might be bringing in some new exciting work for the team to get motivated in. And also, if you wanted to launch a new service, it might be less risky to do it in a project rather than sort of committing to a long-term contract with the client. Of course, when we're talking about projects and especially sort of SEO focused projects, it can be quite easy for the team to over deliver, especially when we're trying to impress a client. We've got a short space of time to do that. There's also often quite a lot of admin involved compared to the actual period of time that the client will be guaranteed to stay with us, and often obviously tight deadlines as well, which can be quite stressful for the team. So it's really important to make sure that you've got the right workflows and processes in place. And as I said before, once you've done the project once, the learnings that you can take will make it cheaper for the next client to enjoy. Now, when we're talking about high value SEO projects, it might be a bit of what does it mean? So the idea is that we're thinking outside of the SEO books. We're not just doing a tech audit. We're not just doing a couple of editorial links. It's something that is very focused on the user and the user journey. Often, what I would say the results are focused on is more conversion related rather than rankings. The rankings might come indirectly, but it's very much focused on something that will improve an organic user's experience, whether it's on your site or off-site perhaps. So it is usually something that has a beginning and an end. So therefore it's a project, but there's obviously always a potential to continue on some capacity after the project finishes. So I've got a couple of examples of these types of projects and a few that we've also done with our clients. One being UX innovations. I struggle to kind of think of a name for that. And when we're talking about this, we're not necessarily talking about redesigning a site or executing CRO. It's more about how can you make the experience for the user better and therefore perhaps increase organic conversions. So one example could be to migrate your client's blog into a very well-structured content hub. That includes a lot of different steps within it, but once it's been launched, that content already exists. You don't necessarily need to continue working on it, except if you want to. So that's an example of quite technical, perhaps design, creative heavy projects that will eventually have some SEO value as well. Or perhaps you want to start personalizing the user journey. Maybe when they land on a homepage, they click on certain CTA, they will go on a personalized journey, which another user wouldn't see. So there's a few different elements that you can do when we're talking about UX and improving conversions. You can implement some more tech on your client side. There's so many AI APIs now, so you can utilize AI, perhaps do more immersive content, interactive content as well, like calculators or games, and therefore, again, increase engagement on the page. Then if we're talking about sort of content strategies, content production, often even bigger brands, our clients might not actually have content guidelines. So SOPs or brand messaging, tone of voice documents, etc. And that's something that you can do as a one-off project and therefore hand it over to the client and then have your team utilize it if you do the client content production yourself. And then last example would be creating a thought leadership content strategy for the client. So again, not necessarily just copy for their website, but things like podcasts and webinars and video series, etc. And again, the next stage could be the implementation itself. I've got a couple of examples, like real life examples of these. So this is from Calendly's website. I don't know if you've been on their website recently, but their resource section is great. And what they do is they structure it very well for the user to be able to find the kind of content that they're interested in. They're repurposing content for different formats. And yeah, very much sort of focus on that topical authority building as well. The other example I found was on Shopify's site. So they use AI or probably machine learning more so to provide a tool which gives you a great business name. So it basically, you give some keywords in it and it generates like relevant business names so that you can use them for your domain. Which in itself is already great for user engagement, but it can also be a great asset for like digital PR or editorial link building. Again, when we're talking about trying to sell high-value SEO projects, there's some considerations, mainly around sort of focusing on innovation and collaboration with your client, perhaps freelancers. You might need to collaborate with other agencies. You might have a project that you don't have all the skills internally in your agency, which is fine, especially for the services that you might want to trial first. And very much, again, requires very strong project management, making sure that you've got the workflow set up. And sometimes you might benefit from having a retainer in the background with the client so that you get best of both worlds by having sort of shorter deadlines, but also long-term revenue from the same client. Now we're going to finish off with a couple of surprise and delight tactics. I've divided these into two, so whether existing clients or new clients, so within the sales process. With existing clients, if you want to just make them happy, bring them some extra value, especially the high CLV ones, you might want to give them some free audits, something that is going to be beneficial for them, but also hopefully it doesn't, take too long for your team to create. Whether it's audits, but also perhaps sharing some resources. Maybe you've written some white papers that you want to give them, first access. But generally providing that extra value, nurturing the relationship, and yeah, beyond anything that you're doing on a day-to-day, essentially. And then with new clients, just to get your relationship in a good start, you could provide some proof of concept projects initially, sort of maybe trial campaign for digital PR, especially if they've never done digital PR before. Not necessarily for free, but again, more shorter, more flexible, perhaps slightly lower cost. And especially if the client has already converted, why not start the relationship with a free strategy session or workshop or brainstorming with the client, just to bring that extra value from the start of the relationship. Now, I'm going to leave you with a couple of final thoughts. Just going back to basics when it comes to SEO sales, trying to focus on the genuine need of the client. What extra value can you really bring? Obviously, we're often talking about ROI, but also just generally, what are also the pain points that you're trying to fix with your solution, rather than here's some hours that we'll spend on your account. This is more about what kind of value you can actually bring to the whole team.
Annika, thanks a lot for the insights. That was great.